Welcome. So we're going to be looking at this Tic-Tac-Toe with a Rails API, specifically part 1. Oops. And yeah, so while that's running, let's take a look at some of this Readme. This lab is the first half of a two-part challenge in which you're tasked with building a browser-based tic-tac-toe game using jQuery and a Rails API. Tic-tac-toe never goes away in this curriculum. So objectives: explore the directory structure of a single-page application, set up routes and actions to serve JSON via a Rails API, use active model serializers, gem, to serialize Ruby objects to and from JSON, create a custom serializer that overrides the default provided by active model serializers and complies with the Json Api Specification. Learn about the active record-based serialize method for serializing arrays, hashes, and other non-mappable objects. All right. Directory structure of a single-page application. Since this may be the first single-page application, SPA for short, you've built, let's take a minute to check out the directory structure. Application has only a single view, and that is right here. In which we've sketched out the visual components of our tic-tac-toe game. We'll talk more about the individual elements in the next lesson when we start wiring up all of the functionality with jQuery. For now, just marvel at the simplicity of our lone view, controller, and route. Let's see. One route. One controller, one view. Sweet. Let's see what this looks like. Oh, migrations are pending. Okay. Even after we finish building our fully featured tic-tac-toe game, index will still be the only page that gets loaded by the browser. Once loaded, users will be able to play tic-tac-toe games, save in progress games, view a list of all saved games, and load any saved game state back onto the board to continue playing, all without refreshing the page. This is the magic of JavaScript. Before we can dive into all that functiony goodness, we first need to set up the back end of our application. And single-page applications are something that is really taking hold. React is, I think, the biggest pusher of that, but really just, loading everything on the client side in the browser, something like with JavaScript. And once it's loaded, that's it. It's there. You just have a base HTML page. In React, you typically just have one div on it, and that div is where your JavaScript attaches to, and it does everything from there. Setting up our Rails API. What time is it? Game time. Our tic-tac-toe domain model centers on a game class. Every instance of game will have a unique ID as well as a state property, an array representing the current state of the board. If you plumb the depths of your memory, this may look a bit familiar from your first days learning Ruby. Yes, tic-tac-toe from procedural Ruby or object-oriented Ruby, or both. There's nothing for us to add to the existing game class yet, but there's plenty of other work to do. If you hop into the test suite, you'll see that we have some routes and controller actions to set up. So let's look at what's going on with tests. Let's see. Control Shift backtick. Let's see, models, game. Okay, 5 failing tests. Games controller can create a new game, create properly serializes the state attribute, returns a JSON API compliant serialized object, persists changes, returns JSON API compliant serialized object. Okay, so we got some things to do. Most of the work required to set up the game's controller will be a straightforward review of the preceding active model serializers and 2 JSON labs. You'll need to set up routes and actions for the following endpoints. So we need a \games, a post, that's going to be a create, a get, that'll be an index, and then we'll have a game/ID, a get and a patch to show and update some games. Hint, as you're working through the game's controller tests, you might happen upon some missing template errors. Remember that we're building an API, so we definitely don't need to add any templates to our game controller actions. If you're having some trouble figuring it out, take a look back at previous labs, and as always, remember the point of the render. To turn our Rails API plays nicely with the forthcoming JavaScript front end, relying on our old friend AMS to serialize game objects into JSON and back. Note we're using AMS version 0.10.6, which introduced a ton of breaking changes over 0.9.x. Check out the documentation if you run into any trouble. So let's see. Yep, 0.10.6. Cool. And back. Once your routes and games controller actions are set up properly, you should be seeing RSpec errors like this. Okay. Let's see. I didn't actually look at these. Which test was that? Games controller show returns a JSON API compliant. Oh, our routes aren't set up. Okay. And games controller actions. Okay. So let's set that up. Our routes and game controller actions, which are right here. So let's go to our config routes. I'm actually going to get rid of all of this commented out stuff. Just gets in the way. All right, there we go. Be a little bit cleaner. So we can let's just do a resources for games. That. Let's see, what do we need? We need an index, show, create, update. All right. Show, create, update. And then to go with that, games controller. Index won't have anything in them just yet. Show, create, update, date. All right. Let's see if we get something better than this error right now. Okay, there's our missing template that was being talked about. bunch of routes and actions. Okay, so let's work on setting up these routes. So for our index, if we think about this, well, let's also run these migrations that we ran into. I still have it. No, I didn't grab it. Okay. Okay, there's our tic-tac-toe board. This is what our index is currently. That HTML page. This is what it's built out for us. So let's look at these tests a little bit more. So for index, we only have one thing that we're working with. One model, our games. So ultimately what we're going to need is, like most of our indexes, we get all of what we have, and then we need to render. And because we're building an endpoint, we want to render that in JSON. Let's see. I think that'll give us a better, like that's create, show, update, index. Okay, so there, yeah, expected and got. So it's still not exactly what we're looking for, but it's definitely looking better. We're not getting that missing template error anymore. So I'm going to fail fast in there, but let's fill out these other ones. So this is going to have, let's think, a render of a JSON. Let's do game. We're going to get an ID coming in from the params, if we remember looking at here. So game equals game.find params ID render JSON game. We're obviously building this out of order for the tests, which isn't helpful. Index, update, show. Okay, we're getting better error in show. So create first. So let's fill in this create route. So we can actually use fail fast. Or I guess we're not going to be able to, because we're not going to be able to get past that just yet. So yeah, game equals game.create. We're going to create a new game. I guess we need to start thinking about some sort of game params, which we should set in a private method. Follow good Rails convention. And only permit some things. Let's see. Every instance of game will have a unique ID as well as a state property. So it looks like we're just going to have state. That's it. That's an array. I think that should be what we need. Okay. With that, There's this create. Need to render JSON again for the game. Four failures, something passed. Huh, nice. Properly serializes the state. Attribute as an array instead of a string. Okay, so there's still some work to be done. And update. Let's see. Another template missing. Okay, so let's get update doing something. Well, first we need to find our game. Since we're finding our game in two different places, let's get another method for that. Find game. Game equals game.find. Oh. Params ID. Okay. Then let's set that up here. That's a before action. And we have show and update. All right, so now we have our game. Where's our show? This just needs to become that. Update. All right. Update. Game update. And the same game params. And another render. This time it's at game, which we should. Oh, got that. Cool. Okay, let's see. Cool. So back to our README we go. Active model serializers. To ensure that our Rails API plays nicely with the forthcoming JavaScript front end, we're relying on our old friend active model serializers to serialize game objects into JSON and back. Once your routes and game controller actions are set up properly, oh yeah, we got this part. Okay. Your calls to render object are being intercepted by AMS, but the gem isn't formatting them correctly. We're trying our best to be good developers, which means we should adhere to the version 1 of the JSON API specification. Oh. Archive copy. It's a 1.1. Oh, upcoming version. Latest version? Oh. Still 1.0. I wonder what changed. I didn't even know that we had a specification. When serializing objects. Unfortunately, AMS defaults to its own serialization strategy, so we need to do a bit of manual configuration. Okay. Create a new Ruby file and config initializers directory. You can name your file whatever you want, but something like active model serializers or AMS. Let's just do AMS. That's, oh, we can do the long one. It's more descriptive, so we know what it is. Make the most sense. Where were we putting that again? Config initializers. In that file, paste the following code. I'll just type it out. Active model serializers.config.tap do c and adapter equals JSON API. JSON API include top level object equals true. JSON API. Oh, API version equals 1.0. So this tells AMS to use the JSON API serialization adapter to include a top-level object and to adhere to the version 1.0 of the JSON API specification. For some reason, AMS's default JSON API configuration does not include a top-level object, despite the JSON API specification's insistence on a top-level object called data. At this point, we're getting close to a fully functioning JSON API compliant serializer. However, there are two final pieces we have to set up. So let's see if anything changes. No, not yet. All right. AMS defaults to serializing every attribute on a model, but for this project, we don't care when a game instance was created or updated. To control which attributes get serialized, we're going to create a custom serializer that inherits from the base active model serializer class. When we call on AMS to serialize an object or collection of objects, AMS will first look in the app serializers directory, if one exists, to see if a user-defined serializer matches the objects to be serialized. Let's use the AMS generator that we learned about a few labs ago to create a new game serializer. So let's do that. Which should result in the following code: app serializers game serializer. App. Okay. Serializers game serializer. There we go. Now, created and updated attributes are excluded from our JSON output. So if we look before, we actually might be able to do, here we go. Let's see, rig routes. Let's look at this. Games. Oh, we don't have any games yet. Let's see. DB. Okay. Spec. Just want to create some games. All right. XOX. It's not being serialized when it's being created, so that's going to cause some issues, but we can now see it. Here is our response to games. And if we were to throw in an ID, say 1, we're going to see just that. Cool. Oh, exit. All right. Excluded from our JSON output. I don't think that's true, is it? Still there. Let's see. Attributes ID state. ID state. I wonder if we have to restart our server for that, something like that to take effect. see. Okay, there we go. Here's our data and our state. Cool. No timestamps. Still seeing errors concerning the state attribute. In our test, we're seeing errors. Yes, we are. All right. If you look closely, you'll notice that it's currently being serialized as a string. Huh, yeah, there's quotes on each end, instead of as an array. This is actually an issue with active record. We're currently trying to store the state attribute and array in a text type database column. In order to properly store arrays, hashes, and other non-mappable objects in a text column, we'll need to call this .serialize class method provided by active record base. All right, so let's go to our game class. Game active record base. And serialize the state as an array. All right. We'll see what happens. All right, that should do it. I'm thinking these are already saved that way, so it's not going to work for those. Let's find out. We can create another one with the same state. All right, let's see. Okay, and there's a state as an array. 1, 2, 3. Let's see, game.first.delete. Game.first.delete. One more time. Let's get rid of those first 3. Now, any new one should have, it's still going to have the ID because that's going to remain. But any new games should have proper state. If we look at the show, view, and now all tests should be passing. Let's see. Our spec. And there we have it. Excuse me. The back end for Tic-Tac-Toe with the Rails API. So that's the Rails API part of the Tic-Tac-Toe. The rest is wiring up some JavaScript on the front end of this single page application to call these endpoints and just get the data and send the data back and forth, depending on what's going on at that point in time.